Welcome to the Religious and Spiritual Traditions, End of Life, and Psychedelic Care. I'm so excited to be able to moderate this panel of illustrious experts in their respective fields. We'll primarily be talking about Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, and hopefully Islam as well. But I will tell you that these individuals, their experience ranges far and wide, much more beyond what much more beyond what we kind of assigned their roles as of today. So anyway, I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But basically today, what we're going to do is from each respective religious or spiritual tradition, or we'll talk about what are those end-of-life rituals and what does their belief in the afterlife look like. And then we'll segue into psychedelics. First, from the ancient traditions, there's a lot of belief that these psychoactive substances or conscious altering substances have been in use for millennia. And then we'll bring it up to the present time, and we'll talk about how these substances can help those on the death and dying journey. And then we'll turn it over to you guys to ask any questions you might have. I would ask that you do not use the chat, at least for the duration of this first portion. Makes it much easier and less distracting to everybody. And then when we open it up for questions, I'll ask you to raise your hand because that also makes it easier to manage. So having said all that, I'm going to start with Rabbi Dan. If you could introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background and how you found yourself, at least up until this present moment.
First of all, thank you, Christine, for organizing this. It's work that is very important at this moment. I was ordained by through Aleph, the Alliance for Jewish Renewal, and back in 1995, and the leader of the Jewish Renewal movement, Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi of blessed memory, was somebody who worked with Timothy Leary at Harvard, experienced LSD with Timothy Leary and others, and believed that psychedelics were a profound way to experience a primary religious experience, and encouraged his students to explore psychedelics in sacred settings for these four primary religious experience and for healing. And so something that I have been pursuing for the last 25 years, and feel like it's has profound healing dimensions, and especially relevant to support powerful end-of-life rituals and practices. We have over the last several years, there's a group here I'm currently in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I've recently retired from as a congregational rabbi after 30 years in Danville, California, and have formed the Ariel Jewish Healing Center with some other colleagues and friends to more deeply explore healing practices of all many varieties. I think that with regard to end of life, there's opportunities. There's opportunities to do life review work and legacy work, which is an important part of the Jewish tradition for sure, and as far as I understand, every religious tradition. it just the expansive consciousness, the reduction of fear. I was saying that there were recently a group of Jewish religious leaders experimented with intramuscular ketamine as a way of, since ketamine is being used, it's currently being tested nationally in 25 standalone hospice facilities as a way of helping people at end of life come to terms with their existential fear of death and die differently, transition with a different sense of peace of mind. And so we did cohorts with rabbis and chaplains and other Jewish spiritual leaders to give them the experience of intramuscular ketamine under the care of physicians, so that they could more aptly support those who are choosing to use this medicine as part of end of life, that they would have their own experience and be a more sympathetic, I would say compassionate companion, understanding what that experience was like. There's so many opportunities for healing that entheogens and psychedelics allow for people at end of life. And we live at a time where people are understanding this. Protocols are happening at major universities and hospitals, and while not all of these medicines, sacred medicines, are yet decriminalized, more and more it's become clear that that they afford us a way of approaching our end of life with a completely different experience than many have, that has been possible for so many. And to bring the richness of our spiritual traditions into this process is a profound benefit for so many of our people who are approaching end of life. So, I would say, in the Jewish tradition in particular, we have part of our end of life practice is called vidui, which is a confessional, coming to terms with our lives as we approach this profound moment, and again accessing empathogens and entheogens can so profoundly change the way we do our life review process. And there are so many of our strong structures for family systems through grief and through witnessing the end of life for our beloved family members and friends that can change the way we support them and change the way we grieve following their deaths. For so long, people, the Western medical system, has when people are dying and they have visions and they see dead relatives and other things, the common response has been to dismiss these experiences as delusions. And we know now that we have our own psychedelics in our bodies that are often released around the time of our deaths. And when we know that scientists are working on looking at the DMT that's released, and so it can change the way we support people rather than dismissing their visions as delusions. We can honor them as perhaps sacred, natural psychedelic experiences, and provide a different support, a different love and compassion as people move towards towards their own deaths. So there's
So
so many.
Rabbi,
Yes,
Rabbi, I'm gonna say you're giving the whole presentation right now. So let's come back to you in a little bit, okay? I'm gonna
happy.
segue over to Hunt. And yes, introduce yourself. And I think along the lines of what Rabbi Dan just did, go ahead and introduce yourself, as the founder of Legare and how you got there. But also then, yeah, why don't you go ahead and segue into the Christian faith's end of life rituals and belief in the afterlife.
Okay, sure. So as weird as it is, my last name is Priest, and that's also my vocation. I'm a priest in the Episcopal Church. Been ordained about 20 years, and in 2015, I've served congregations in different parts of the country. I live in Savannah, Georgia now, which is where I came in 2016. But right before that, I'd seen an ad in a magazine called The Christian Century for a research study at Johns Hopkins and NYU. They were looking for religious professionals who were also psychedelically naive. So I clicked both of those boxes and applied to be in that religious professional study at Hopkins and NYU. And so in February of 16, I found myself at Hopkins, had two profound religious experiences a month apart, and using the protocol they've been using for people in the depression and end of life studies. So the same protocol, just a different population. So it was not a mental health study per se. And I knew in the moment and later after the first experience that it would change my ministry, how I saw myself as a Christian clergy person and leader. And I spent about 5 years discerning what that would be. Is that do I need to become a facilitator? All the questions, like what am I going to do with this amazing experience I've been given, working with the best researchers in the country. Bill Richards was my guide and one of my guides. And so it took me 5 years, but what I realized was there was no organization or mechanism or platform to bring the research initially, all that research and learn healing of mental health issues back to religious leaders, to the church community, and to the public, but kind of focusing on the Christian community primarily. So I 3.5 years ago started this nonprofit Legare, which is Latin for unite or to bind. It's the root word of religion. And so started that 3.5 years ago as a place to gather Christians and others, researchers, and anyone else interested in the topic for finding the others, to share knowledge and information, and to begin to help Christians see the connection between the ministry of healing, Jesus's ministry of healing, the ministry of the church as it pertains to healthcare and medicine and mental health, connecting that to the spiritual experiences people are having with psychedelics. So, as I say, if the church doesn't care about healing, we should shut the doors, as well about transformation, personal transformation, and community transformation. That I think indigenous communities and others, the Jewish community, much farther along in the conversation than we are, but figuring out the ways to support Christians and others in this work. And so, as far as death and end of life in the Christian tradition, there are probably as many opinions about that as there are groups of Christians. As I say, there are many Christianities, just like there are many expressions of Islam and expressions of Judaism as well. But I think at the core, the best of the Christian tradition says about death is that at our death, life is changed, not ended. That's a line out of the Episcopal burial service, and I think that really is good theology. I think we get in trouble when we start trying to be too specific about things that none of us have experienced until we die ourselves. So I always say when this question comes up, trust God, trust that we are all created in God's image and return to the source, and that we'll let God sort out the details of that. Sadly, I think Christians are often the most afraid to die. People that work in palliative care have told me that, which is just tragic to me, that a religious tradition based at the core story is that at our death, there's a cycle of life, death, and resurrection that we see in nature, and we see that in human beings, and that resurrection is not resuscitation, that in our death we become a new creation. That's Easter story. And so it's tragic that in a tradition based on a story of life, death, and resurrection and new life, that Christians are the most afraid. And I think that's what the institutional church has done to scare people and around judgment. And so, again, there's no one Christian theology or idea about the afterlife. And I try to tell people, let's just trust God on that and live our lives in this holy way as we can. I think, I think the goal for the church and all religious people, all religious communities, is a peaceful and holy death. I think that's what and right now we fill people up with morphine to take care of physical pain and then give them something for anxiety. But what I think the promise of psychedelics is that, and that's what the research is showing all the way back, at least at Hopkins to 2000, the first study was with around death and dying, and realized that people can get to that point with a terminal diagnosis and discover that actually there's more to that. There's more to life than what we see, and that even if whatever their own theologies about that are, that people come to a place of not just acceptance but trust that everything's okay. And so I wish there was one way the church understood death and dying, but I think to say two things I would say. One is at the core of the Christian beliefs, and I think in general other religions, is death is not the end. And the other is that our desire for all of us, ourselves and others, is a peaceful and holy death. And as much as religious communities can do to help make that happen, and working with psychedelics, if that's where people want to go, not for everyone, but I think that's got real possibilities. And one of the saddest parts of my ministry was me working with dying people and knowing that I had access and knowledge of something that could help that was totally illegal, and they would have endangered, to do it would have endangered my own ministry. So I'm pondering now what we might be able to do around that, because I do think there's a professional obligation and a spiritual and religious obligation for all of us that are in those traditions to provide a peaceful and holy death. So I'm gonna stop there, but there's more that unites all of us than separates us, and I think each of our traditions has a lot to offer others in the world if we can get over ourselves. And I'm really talking to Christians more than anybody else about getting over ourselves. So that's it. I'm in.
Thank you, Hunt. Norma, let's turn it over to you and talk. You've got such a wealth of information and knowledge across a lot of faith and spiritual traditions. But if you could sort of talk about how you got here and your background in Buddhism and Buddhism's belief in end of life rituals and afterlife.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everybody. So great to be with you on this topic. Well, Buddhism teaches that while we're here, the most important purpose of our lives is to maximize our potential for enlightenment. That's how I've felt since childhood. The most important task, learning to navigate realms of consciousness with skill for healing of self and others, has been what I've been investigating since I was really little. I was gifted with having elaborate dreams and altered states in my childhood, and it was encouraged by my family. My grandmother in particular was both a medical doctor and a psychic intuitive healer, and she was adopted into the Native American reservation where we lived. So I was immersed in, if you will, studies of altered states right from the beginning. And it was pretty cool because I was in a family where the women on both sides of the family in the 1920s had founded a supernaturalist church in inner city Buffalo, mixed black and white. So I grew up with supernatural states of consciousness being normalized. And then being with the Seneca Iroquois people that my grandmother was adopted by, that Native American path became very important to me. And when I was in college, I knew that I wanted to be something to do with helping people to navigate deep states of consciousness. So I studied Christian theology. But at that time, I found, this was in the 70s, very little in Christianity had come out about mysticism or the mind-body relationship. So in my early 20s, I was drawn to Buddhism. And I realized I just had to find a way to study Buddhism, yoga, meditation in any way that I could to learn more about this mind-body connection. So I found out that Buddhist monks and nuns meditated on dying from a young age to deconstruct our ego identity. So I chose to do this at age 22, when I was out of college, going to work in a nursing home. And wow, was that ever a study in how our culture doesn't deal very well with dying. By the time I was 26, I studied Vipassana meditation, which is about deconstruction of all of our mental obscurations so that we can really learn not to cling. By age 27, I'd met the Huichol, Guadalupe de los Rios, wonderful teacher who was training us in psychedelics through peyote. I studied with her for 20 years. By age 28, I'd met Michael Harner, who has just come back from the Amazon and was teaching us how to do shamanic drum journeys to the other side and back. Age 29, I really wanted to go and live in a Buddhist country where it was practiced firsthand. So I got myself over there and lived in Japan for 4 years. When I got back, I wanted to study Buddhist Christian dialogue, and had realized that Buddhism was majorly a psychology of religious experience. So I ended up studying my master's and PhD work in the psychology of religious experience. When I was 34 there in the Bay Area, I met Thich Nhat Hanh and began to study with him. That was such a rich experience of my life, and I became the director of the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, his organization, and thereby was involved in being one of the leaders in the early American Buddhist movement. Buddhism, it's such an intricate and deep, powerful way of understanding how the mind works and how to navigate many states of consciousness, and all with the purpose of coming through to seeing reality such as it is, which is called Tathagata, suchness. So I'm very glad that I got to go and study Buddhism firsthand in a Buddhist country, because that gave me firsthand experience without the interpretation of others. So just to say a little bit more about where it all evolved to me, I also then got my Master's of Divinity and became a hospice chaplain. So I have witnessed hundreds of deaths and many, many memorial services performed. And I eventually founded my own healing centers in Santa Fe and then here in Ashland, Oregon, where I was able to experiment with helping people recover from drug and alcohol and mental health issues through altered states, not using psychedelics, because of course it wasn't legal, but using meditation and drumming journeys and all different ways, breath work to alter people's states to help them with actually recovery from being addicted. I think that people really need to have access to altered states as our basic human need and right. So to just tell people you can't go into altered states doesn't work. So to bring it forth to the psychedelic movement, I've had a lot of experience in psychedelics, from wonderfully being trained by shamanic teachers. And in the 90s, I was part of this 8-year-long experimental group with doctors, psychologists, myself, where we experimented with many different types of hallucinogens, all for the purpose of use in our healing practice. So by the time the psychedelic renaissance came along in the 2019, 2020, I was asked to be on the Oregon Rules Committee here with the Psilocybin Services Department of the Health Department to help formulate how this whole training of people to be facilitators for psychedelic journeys would roll out in our state. I also was asked by the Synthesis organization out of Amsterdam to help write and teach the first training program for facilitators that happened in the world. Along with Dr. Roz Watts and others, we created this wonderful year-long training program, and I was in charge of the wisdom track, bringing forth the ancient lineages of teaching around altered state experiences. In the last couple of years, I've been working on authoring some books. First one is called Lucid Dreaming, Lucid Living. It's about the use of lucid dreaming and then applying it in our lives to go into, altered states with that technique of dreaming and lucid dreaming. And then the next book is coming out in the spring, published by Inner Traditions. It's called Navigating Liminal Realms. And my premise is that in ancient and traditional cultures, people didn't jump right to the use of psychedelics. They were trained. As I was saying, in Buddhism, through meditating on death, through meditation and working with dreams and working with going into lucid states through drumming journeys, people did that for years before they took psychedelics. So that's what I'm big on, is teaching people that we have this natural access to altered states within our own biochemistry and minds that we can need to access and learn to navigate that way before taking the psychedelics. And then we'll be much more skillful and adept at that. I think I'll stop there for now and wait to do my talking more about Buddhist teachings on death and dying in the next section of our talks. But I have a lot to say about, the specific wonderful teachings in Buddhism on death and dying, but I'll stop for now and come back to that.
Thank you, Norma. Welcome, Sugra. So please do introduce yourself and tell the folks kind of how you got to where you are, at least in this present moment.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I don't know if I'm the most Eastern located of this group, but I'm in the United Kingdom, and it's a real pleasure to be with you here today. I'm actually from the UK. I'm not just visiting. I live here. And when Chris and Hunt approached me and asked whether I would like to be part of a conversation, specifically as a Muslim and as a Muslim who has strong connections with plant medicine and making meaning as a result of those journeys, I was delighted to be able to say yes. Apologies, I joined a little earlier. I thought it was an hour later. So very grateful, Hunt, for the little nudge to say that we are online. My name is Sugra Ahmed, and I was born and raised in the United Kingdom, in the northwest of England, if anybody's familiar, near Manchester. And I grew up in diaspora, so my family, my heritage hails from Pakistan, kind of right after partition, but obviously, of course, before partition also. But there's something about being in diaspora, negotiating or being curious and then encountering various different ways of being, of expressing spiritually, religiously, theologically, in all sorts of different ways as a human being. And for me, as a young child, I was given a basic education, Islam 101, if you like. After school, we would go to the local masjid, the mosque, for a couple of hours each day, 5 days a week. And a local imam would do his level best to try and teach us something about our faith. And there was a kind of schizophrenic lifestyle here, folks, because on the one hand, you're at school all day and then maybe playing outside with your friends for a little while, and then off to the masjid, and then weekends are all about family, mainly about family and getting ready for school again the next day. And so in all of those other spaces, I was being encouraged to be curious and to sort of ask questions, particularly at school. And in my religious learning, I was being asked to accept the word of God. No questions. We don't question the word of God. And so those were my very, very early learnings about Islam. And although I learned to read and recite by rote, I didn't understand classical Arabic, because a lot of young people don't. We're not taught the language, we're taught to read by rote, so that if at a later stage in life you want to lean on those teachings, lean on those verses, those chapters that you have memorized in formal prayer, which is a key component of formal prayer, that you have those tools. And essentially, I think what that generation before me was trying to do is it never, and nor did the generations before it, benefit from any kind of religious or spiritual formal or informal education. And what they would do is, in the context and the climates that they were in, particularly before migration, is look to an elder in the community, and somebody who sort of looked and sounded and behaved as though they led an upright life was somebody that they would trust their child's education, religious education with. And usually that person would have some kind of basic knowledge about what it means to live a good life, what it means to live a life that is in keeping with the values that we are taught in through the Quran, which Muslims believe is the word of God. I believe is the word of God. And we still study Quran in its original Arabic, in its original language. And then there are translations in pretty much every language that you can think of all around the world. And so at a later stage in life, I embraced Islam for myself, as a conscious act. And I came across an English copy of the Quran and was kind of bowled over, really, when I'd heard these stories, and my grandparents were fantastic. My parents were brilliant in trying to help me to understand this. You come from a very, very important tradition, and that is the Abrahamic tradition. You're at this third component of it, which is called Islam, and as a Muslim, that means that you believe in X, Y, and Z. And so in early adult years was my opportunity to really explore that and to test that, really. And so I became very active in Muslim circles. I went back to university to do my master's in Islamic studies. I sat at the feet of scholars for many, many, many years, learning, studying, asking questions, really sort of kind of pushing the envelope, as it were, to understand that yes, of course, you can have different kinds of readings of text and tradition, literal being one of those, and that gets us into all sorts of trouble, no matter what flavor of which path we have towards God. But there is room, and it's an important part of learning. There is room to push the envelope, to be critical, to ask questions, to really push back against, well, that's what the theology says, and our lived reality is this. And so you're making meaning from the text the whole time. And again, when you live in diaspora, that's a key part of how you learn, how you grow, how you evolve here in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. So I was fortunate to be able to go back to university and do that work. I also trained to be a chaplain, and I served mainly on university campuses, on college campuses, both here in the UK, but also in the US. I have spent almost all of my adult life trying to do this kind of work of building understanding and helping people to really sort of unpack what they think that they know about different religious traditions, including rituals and practices at end-of-life care. And I have done that mainly in academic, policy, and community activist settings. And I think that's a really important combination, where you are able to take sort of high ideals in the world of academia, maybe even philosophy, if you bring a little bit of that sort of thinking into it, and really sort of sit with it and work with people to understand, well, how does this work in policy terms for real people's everyday lives, making meaning out of these high ideals and concepts. And then how do you root that in communities? How do you actually enable communities on the ground to benefit from that? And so there's a really important thread that's run through my work, and that is helping people to build understanding around these critical subjects, so particularly around Islam, but also other religious traditions. It helps that as a young child, I went to an Anglo-Catholic school and would go to mass every Tuesday at the church next door, and Christian prayer is a phenomenally important part of my life. Even today, I have Christian elders who visit my home, and when we say grace, we refer to the elder at the table to say grace, and in these cases, the elder is a practicing Christian and would say grace in a way that is in keeping with their tradition. And these are values and ways of being that just feel so incredibly I mean, it feels like an incredible privilege, because I went into the study that Hunt talked about. I was at Stanford University at the time in California as Associate Dean for Religious Life, so religious professional, which is what the study was looking for. And as the only Muslim who signed up, I was pretty pleased to have my people, not just Muslims, but women and women of color at the table in this really important study. I was also psychedelically naive, to say the least. I had no idea. I mean, I hadn't heard of the word psychedelic until the study came up in a conversation with a friend. And then the scientists who were sort of leading the study encouraged me to remain psychedelically naive. And so, you want to get one opportunity to do this, right? Once you start reading and learning and talking to people about their stories and their journeys and how they make meaning and all of that, it sort of, it seeps into you and you'll never get that chance again. So I honored that request and I took part in the study, and I had 2 journeys at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, and had the time of my life in encountering the divine, and having this incredible, 2 experiences that that was in 2018, and I'm still trying to understand and still trying to, we call it integration, but I call it making meaning. I'm trying to make meaning from that. And I think all of the things that I've shared with you, and probably a few more, in terms of the expansive nature of how I was raised and where I was raised, and the kind of family that I had, who, when I would say to them, if you could write me a note for my teacher, it means that I don't have to go to school on Tuesday morning because they all go to church. And so I can have a half a day at home with my parents. And they were not interested in that in the slightest, much to my chagrin. And it's transformative, right? Being in spaces like that, not just at a young age, but at any age, entering those spaces in as authentic a way as possible, and being open to what might sort of unfurl or evolve inside of you. I mean, that's living, that's life, that's existence. And I feel that part of my life really influenced the way that I have then gone on to live my life. I remember, before the psychedelic study, right before, I went to the US for a fellowship at Yale, and I had a couple of months left on my visa before having to come home. And I decided that, because this was between that famous election and the inauguration, that I wanted to go on a road trip across, well, at the time I was thinking Bible Belt. And I did. I started in Utah and worked my way down to the Southern California, and then state by state came to the East Coast. And just on a listening exercise, where my intention was to just be and remain completely open and live, and allow other people to live too, by sharing these stories without judgment, without expectation. I try my best to be without judgment. Some of the conversations were pretty tough, and it was especially important, that piece of work, because of the timing of it. We just had a series of debates that were awful at best. And before that, I had just left the UK, and we'd just had Brexit, which was a horrible experience for our country, horrible experience. And some months before that, we'd had the Scottish referendum. And so there were so many messages at a national and international level that were telling me that the world we're kind of in our bubbles, and we're punching out each other's bubbles, and not with a name to understand or to connect or to empathize or to have compassion, but actually to say that, my way is the only way. And that didn't feel right. And so it just so happened that road trip then led to the job at Stanford, that led to the study, that led to me sitting here before you today, in this conversation.
Yeah, when Suga told me that story, I thought, wow, what a brave woman, and kudos to you. But I think it reminds me too, listening to the 4 of you, it's what Hunt had said, there's a lot more commonalities here than separates us. So Rabbi Dan, let's go back to you. And you started to share some of the information about Judaism and end-of-life rituals. So can you expand on that somewhat? And if you want, then let's just start with that. And B, let's be mindful of the time, because we're already 45 minutes in. So I knew this conversation was going to be really rich. But go ahead, Rabbi.
Thank you. So beautiful to witness the other panelists and their journeys. In Judaism, we approach, I mean, life, while there's so much we speak about in the tradition about what happens after death, the focus is clearly on life and choosing life and what we do with this precious life that we have. And so there are rituals on preparing for end of life, and there's rituals around readying oneself for the transition to the next plane. And you know, we have we clearly don't, you know, and again, as Hunt spoke, you know, there's so many Judaisms and so many, just like there's so many Christianities, and you could talk to 4 other rabbis and get four other very different perspectives, but it's pretty clear and is shared across many different movements in Judaism that that death is not an ending, and that, you know, the challenge is to reformat our experience with someone who is no longer embodied. And we have prayers, deep prayers around how to stay connected with people, because we know that people die and love doesn't die. And we maintain that love and that connection. But we live in such a death-phobic culture that everything's telling us it's over, it's done, and you know, it pollutes our ability to embrace the beauty of creating these kinds of relationships. And so we have a rich array of rituals that, you know, we at all of our major holidays, we have services in which we are invited to connect deeply with our loved ones who have died. You know, and so this approach to death deeply informs how we die. And our rituals are really, I think it's in a way, as again Hunt, you know, talked about the fear that is prevalent in so many, that he has experienced in so many Christians. I have walked this end of life passage with well over 100 people, been at deathbeds, and with families and with individuals who are transitioning, and to hold space for them. You know, one of the main challenges is dealing with their fear, and I think that you know, our rituals guide us away from fear. We don't deny the fear, but we understand that fear is one aspect of awe, and death, just like birth, is a profoundly sacred experience. And the goal of our rituals is to guide people to the larger sense of awe, and not just on the smaller dimension of fear. I think that you know, those are the rituals. I mean, the rituals are guide us to set our lives in order to whatever degree we're able, to speak our truths to our loved ones, and to do a powerful life review, and to prepare to come to terms with and be accepting of this time of the end of our lives.
Beautiful, Rabbi. Thank you so much. Norma.
Well, thanks for the chance to talk about the wonderful ways that Buddhism offers us skills to approach death. I'll pick up on something that the rabbi was saying, that One of my wonderful teachers, Thich Nhat Hanh, has written a lot on death and dying, and one of his books is called No Death, No Fear. And here's a quote from it. He says, "So do not be afraid of death. Death is just a continuation, and so is birth. At every moment, death is happening in your body. Some cells are dying so other cells can come to life. Death is indispensable to life. If there is no death, there is no birth, just as there can be no left if there is no right. Don't hold out hope that life will be possible without death. You must accept both of them, birth and death. If you practice well, you can gain insight into the ultimate dimension while remaining in touch with the historical relative dimension. And when you are deeply in touch with the historical dimension, you also touch the ultimate dimension, and you see that your true nature is no birth and no death. Then living is a joy. Dying in order to begin again is also a joy. Starting over is a wonderful thing, and we're starting over constantly. Beginning anew is one of our main practices in Buddhism, and we must die every day in order to renew ourselves, in order to make a fresh start. Learning to die is a very profound practice. So right from the time you begin Buddhist training, you're letting go of your conceptions of reality. We have what's called the 5 skandhas, and that's the way that a human takes embodiment and then forms our identity and forms our perceptions of reality. And then we form those perceptions into reified form, and we get pretty attached to our worldviews. So we develop these 5 skandhas, but then as we're alive, we've got to be deconstructing what we have had to put in place too. So that's our paradoxical life here, right? We have to live out these lives and create our identity and everything, but then we also have to be constantly letting go and deconstructing our identity. So this practice of learning how to study the mind and realize how you have created certain attachments and ways of perceiving things that ultimately aren't accurate is a practice of facing into death while we're alive. So impermanence, you've heard a lot about that. There's a wonderful death poem by a Zen master. There's this practice in Japan of when you reach your death, you try to create a short poem, a haiku, that sums up everything you've learned. So I love this one. It says, this life of ours, to what shall I compare it? To the white wake of a boat, rowing away in the early dawn. This life of ours, to what shall I compare it? To the white wake of a boat, rowing away in the early dawn. So it's this sense of the ephemeral, and so much of Japanese culture is artfully helping you to accept the impermanence of life. But then that also leads to a feeling of the preciousness of every moment. So one thing that Thich Nhat Hanh was known for saying was present moment, only moment. Present moment, only moment. So the teaching of the Buddha tells us that clearly and plainly, this one particular moment is magnificent. So the present moment has to become the most wonderful moment, each present moment, if we can be aware and accepting of what is, then we're both practicing impermanence, but practicing this fullness of joy in the moment. We're taught to even detach from our own body. And so at the same time as studying very deeply into our presence in this body, in this moment, we have to accept that the body is not all of who we are. So this is another short, wonderful poem by Thich Nhat Hanh. It says, "This body is not me. I'm not caught in this body. I am life without boundaries. I have never been born and shall never die. Look at the ocean and the sky filled with stars, manifestations of my wondrous true mind. Since before time, I've been free. Birth and death are only doors through which we pass." That's one of his most famous statements about death. Birth and death are only doors through which we pass. Sacred thresholds on our journey. Birth and death are just a game of hide and seek. So laugh with me. Hold my hand. Let us say goodbye joyfully, to meet soon again. We meet today. We will meet again tomorrow. We will meet at the source at every moment. We meet each other in all forms of life. I won't say the whole poem, but another poem he writes is about encountering death, and death tries to scare us. And so he says to death, you can't hurt me. You can't make me not exist. And death says, how do you know that? And Thich Nhat Hanh says, because I reached down and touched the earth. The earth is my mother, and I am one with all of creation. And that comfort is a truth of our interbeingness, that we cannot be separated from life. And you hear me saying this over and over here, but we go on beyond this body. This is a form that we have constructed for the purpose of learning lessons here on earth. But this body is just one form of our consciousness. And so we really are free and even happy to experience this form and let go of this form for whatever's next. I haven't been to Bali, but a friend who has been in Bali and seen the way they practice Buddhism there and their memorial services. And all the people get together and they start laughing and beating drums and cheering and shouting for joy because the person has died. And they go down the street carrying the body in ecstatic states of joy because this person is free from this form to go on to the next adventure. I think we in the Western culture could benefit from that, right? To have more of that true acceptance, because Christianity teaches that too, that, this body is not the end. Judaism teaches that, Islam teaches that, but why don't we have more joy, to be able to let go more quickly? So I think Buddhist meditation practice is a very important thing, or whatever kind of meditation you want to practice, but the practice of while we're alive in this body, going into letting go. I created this process in the 1990s that I've taught to thousands of people now, called the journey to completion. We're all on a journey to completion, and that's what the Huichol call this life path. And so in the journey to completion, I call it a Bodhi, or Buddhist shamanic teaching, about how to practice facing into our fears, into our shadow, and traversing there in the underworld of our unconscious, our inner cosmos, to get the gift from the shadow, to transmute those fears into our empowerment, and to then live a life of more contentment and joy. So this journey to completion practice is about following a pathway in our lives of deconstructing what we have constructed, and going into the symbolic realm, into altered states, and learning how to not just let go, but also actually get the gift out of this path that we've chosen, because we're experiencing certain pains and difficulties and challenges because our particular incarnational destiny path is here to learn about those pains and fears, and to transmute them in this human body, so that we're helping the evolution of all of humanity, to not be afraid of that, not be afraid of that, and therefore moving our consciousness on towards this wholeness. So I think I'll pause there. I think you get the gist of how
Thank you,
important
Norma.
Buddhism has been to me. Thank you.
Sugra, let's go over to you. And let's, if you don't mind, yeah, talk from an Islamic perspective about end of life rituals, what the afterlife belief is, and then why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about how psychedelics then could help in that journey?
Sure, sure. I mean, there are lots of rites of passages for all sorts of different occasions in the journey of the physical body, and the soul obviously being a key part of that, goes on that journey too. And so the idea is that at the point of death, there's a lot of similarities between Islam and what it teaches and what I've already heard, and I think those similarities will continue when we hear from Hunt too. So it's always a really strong reminder about how incredibly interconnected it all is, and we all are. So the rites of passage are that essentially when a Muslim is close to the end of life, I can't help but reflect on my own grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who passed a couple of years ago, and we were very, very close, and she passed at home, and so we were sort of, I guess, had front row seats to her journey for many, many years, including those final days and then hours. And there was something that was really quite powerful in that she had been taught Islam, and again, a lot of these people never took the time nor had the opportunity or the privilege to gain an education on what Islam talks about when we talk about the hereafter, and if we talk about heaven and hell and the journey soul through those spaces. How do you avoid hell? Because hell is talked about in the Quran in these awful, awful ways. Heaven is talked about in these incredibly beautiful ways. So how do you sort of aim for heaven and give hell kind of like a miss on your way? And I think one of the challenges for me as her granddaughter was watching her sort of listen to religious elders or people in the community talk about heaven and hell in those ways, whereas actually these are often thought of as analogies, as examples that might sort of the human mind and the human spirit might understand in these words, but actually it's much more complicated than that. And so, for example, hell has been spoken about by religious scholars in mine and other traditions as your soul's kind of, when all is said and done in terms of the movement between, as Norma was saying, the crossing of this next threshold, as we move away from this life as we know it, that hell is your soul's own kind of reckoning about what it has encountered, what it has witnessed, what it has seen, what it has felt in its journey on earth. And when it has seen or felt or encountered horror, then that is hell. Trying to move through that, trying to process that, trying to understand the enormous capacity of human beings and what they are capable of to themselves and to each other. And so there's something really deeply empowering about that version of hell, rather than all the fire and brimstone kind of stuff that we hear. And at the heart of all of this is God's love and God's mercy. And so even before you start to understand what the future might look like beyond this physical realm, knowing that God's love and God's mercy are spoken about most oft in the Quran, but also those teachings are the teachings of Rumi and many other saints and poets in the Muslim tradition. And I think, although my grandmother was an adorer of Rumi, she just couldn't get past the idea that the fire and brimstone is probably what's right. And no offense to any tradition, but I used to say to her that it's a very Catholic kind of self-flagellating understanding of what lies ahead. Why can't we take a Rumi path for just a minute? His poetry, let's go through that. And other famous old long past poets like Bulleh Shah, who talk about God's love in the most magnificent of ways and this yearning to be with God, but also recognizing that there's a time for this and a time for that. So there's that kind of lens offers a more kind of a longing, yes, but also tinges of excitement about what does the next sort of phase for my soul mean. Will there be joy? Will there be love? Will there be dancing? Will there be song? Will there be all of these things that I can just revel and rejoice in a way that the trappings of the human life doesn't allow? Will I experience joy in a way that I don't even understand? And so those are the teachings that we tried to focus on when I was with her. But then obviously when I was away, the sort of neighborhood imam would come around and say, you know, let's pray together and, you know, make sure that you give that fire and brimstone a bit of a miss. And I think there's the sort of the version that I've described just feels far more empowering, far more in keeping with how Muslims actually understand God. But when it comes to this really terrifying moment about the unknown and how to understand the unknown, particularly for people who learnt the version of that from their grandparents or their parents, and they learnt it from their parents. And so instead of going back to the text directly themselves in the way that we can today, they were relying on these kinds of stories and these sayings. And unfortunately, many of them are quite harsh. My own sort of reflections on the rites of passage that she went through is really to make sure that the individual, like we have heard in other traditions, has a peaceful time in those final months, weeks, hours, whatever it may be. And so keeping her happy and keeping her as well as possible was our primary objective. She'd been ill for a long time, but she just kept bouncing back, and it was amazing to be witness to that. But the minute that the local neighbours and family friends would visit, especially sort of after COVID, right after COVID, and sort of reflect on stories of years and decades gone by, because she was part of the first generation that migrated to this country from Pakistan. So she had some stories to tell, and her health would bounce back. And there was something about her spirit that would become alive, and her eyes would sparkle, despite the fact that she was very, very unwell. Her final moments were with her family, so she was surrounded by her family, and this is kind of considered the ideal way to go. She went in her sleep, so she was unwell those final few days, and we kept watch. But unfortunately, that constant threat that had been hanging over her of from the medical professionals of morphine kind of came into play. And I think of that time, and I think about what we've heard on this call today. I think it was Rabbi Dan that was talking about, or was it Hunt that we were talking about, sort of just people being zonked out, and their final moments are completely oblivious, and they're not themselves, and that's quite. I feel like something is stolen from all of us, including that person, in those final moments that can never be brought back. And so, having been somebody who had engaged in plant medicine, who had engaged in the healing and enjoyed the healing from those experiences, I wish to God that she could have experienced some of that, and many other people, because I think it takes obviously it takes our attention away from fear, and it allows us to be really expansive and dream about where we're going to its fullest extent in terms of what we're capable of as human beings, and being able to understand that this was the soul's journey for this tiny moment, for these really very few moments. The Quran talks about when you reflect on your life on earth, you think seconds have passed, not years. So this tiny part of the soul's journey, as it moves through into the hereafter, we're taught that it will enjoy an infinite life, that there is no end to that soul's existence, and that all souls will meet together and they will enjoy life together, or that kind. I don't want to use the word life because we know it in a very different way, but they will enjoy that experience together in a way that is just simply difficult to understand as a human being. And so all the good that you carry, all the good that you do, will give you comfort in those final moments when the rites of passage are, the prayers are being read over you once you've passed. And the belief is that the soul then departs the body, and it hovers over the body for a number of days that it actually takes for you to be buried. And this is why burial is extremely important in some of our traditions. And so burial is expedited, but that also means that the rituals and the practices that go along with that, and we all just drop everything. I think my Jewish siblings will completely understand that. That person comes first, and this is a final act of service that you are able to do for them. Nothing else matters. And so there's a ritual washing of the body, there's a ritual clothing of the body, there's an adornment of smell and perfume, and there's a sacredness, a softness with which the body is carried, no sudden movements, no loud noises. Something deeply spiritual is happening, not just to the person who's deceased and the soul that is still moving with them, but to everybody in the vicinity, to everybody who's participating in any small way. And then the body is taken to a place of worship, usually, if possible, not always necessary. And the entire congregation, women, men alike, everybody offers a final rite of passage, the final prayer, asking God to hold this person as they move, as they transition, as they cross the threshold. And then the burial takes place. And as these things happen, as the individual is moved from one place, from one station to their final station, the entire congregation is chanting in prayer for them. There's a especially if it's an elder, there's a sense that, you know, you cared for us as a community or a family, and now is our time to really hold you as you move to this final stage. And there's such a gift in being able to do that. It's a really, really powerful thing. And so lots of people try to engage in it. And then there's visits to the cemetery. There's beliefs that the person is now in a place where they are free from pain and all of that good stuff. Some people believe that that person can still watch over them. That's quite controversial. But yeah, that all the souls will be raised on the day of judgment and all will come together in joy. There will be this recompense for what the souls have endured, the darkness of this life. But aside from that, there will be nothing but joy. Yeah, I'm sorry, I got a little bit carried away there in my own sort of heart and my own mind about my own experience. But thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sugra. That was beautiful. So, Hunt, yes, let's come back to you and Christianity and end of life and potentially how you view the potential of plant medicines. You're muted.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry about that. I was listening to Dan and to Sugra and to Norma, thinking again about where the similarities are, and I think Christianity of all these traditions has really lost its way on how we deal with death. And I was thinking about each time that Christianity is split, it's law and fragmented, it's lost its own power. And the first great schism was in the year 1000 when the Eastern and Western church split, and the Western church lost really so much of its understanding of mysticism and mystery. And then in the 1500s, when the Western church split with the Protestant Reformation, we lost even Roman Catholics lost some of this, but the Protestant movement lost its connection to ritual and to mystery, and it became very focused on thought. And so at its worst, the Protestant Reformation left us with individual people on individual journeys with nothing but the Bible, with no community of interpretation at its most extreme. And the Roman Catholic Church went to sort of ritual and nothing else. I mean, again, these are just really broad brushes. And there's something so valuable in between. I think the middle space is always where the beauty is. And I think what we've lost is we lost our ritual in the Western church and the Protestant tradition. We lost the ritual. And my own tradition tried to find the balance of that with mixed success. But if we can return to the rituals, if the church could really find its way back to the rituals, and when I mean, I think confession, or sometimes called the rite of reconciliation, a chance for people to unburden themselves, not for the sake of shame, but for the sake of release. So I encourage people as they're approaching death to, whether with a priest or pastor or just to themselves, to unburden themselves of anything they're carrying. And then I think the closer people get to death, the rite of last rites, or is sometimes called, or in my tradition, ministry at the time of death, where you gather the family and friends over the person, praying for the person, acknowledging what's happening, and marking it with ritual and prayer. And then as people, and then as the priest leaves, to encourage the family to keep quiet, to maybe put some music on sometimes, or to recite psalms, or just to sit in silence and to move in and out of the room. And then the last ritual is the burial, and we sometimes call it a funeral, but the burial of the dead is what we're doing. And I think so many people say, well, I don't want a service. And I always say, it's not for you. It's not for you. It's not for you. It's for everybody else. So the final gift of a death, I think, is a life affirming burial liturgy where the person's celebrated, where we say that life, death, change is change. We're changed, not ended, and acknowledge a life well lived. And that's the best of the Christian tradition that really aligns with certainly with the other traditions. I think just an example of how long Christians wait often for burial out of convenience. We used to bury people within 3 days too. And then we got things like embalming and the funeral industry, and it's like we're too busy for death. And it used to just made me sad that people would wait months because it's not convenient. And it's convenient. We have convenience now because we can embalm people or cremate them, but we're losing so much of the spirituality of that. So, end of my tirade. Christianity offers a beautiful model like the other traditions do. I think we've just gotten in general farther away from it. Rural people, even I'm from Kentucky in the South, people used to sit with the body. The body would come to the house. People weren't afraid of death or dying. It was just so much a part of life. And so somehow returning to that, the tradition of washing the body is beautiful, and you don't ever hear Christians doing that. We'd pay somebody to do that it's like that's too scary. So So returning to these traditions would be, I think, help. And back to plant medicine, for those that are really struggling, to give them a chance to have a sense of unitive consciousness or something along those lines to really help ease them into it. Because that's where people are getting to the point of death and are scared to death, scared to death of death. And even that phrase indicates how bad off we are. But so anyway, death is a portal, and it's the birth canal is one portal, and the death is another birth canal. If we could just see it that way, all of us, we'd be a lot better off. The world would be better off. This fear of dying is just so destructive of our souls, I think. So thank you.
Thank you. We're over time, but I guess I would like to turn back to Rabbi Dan, and if you could comment on how you feel plant medicine may in fact ease that death and dying journey.
Well, I think I just spoke to it himself, and I support that. I think that we come with such a small consciousness, such a restricted awareness, such a deep fear, and the opportunity to open our awareness to the bigger reality of what death means is fundamental to why one would access psychedelics. And I do want to say that in the Jewish tradition, Yom Kippur, our Day of Atonement, the holiest day of the year, is actually a rehearsal for our own deaths. Every year we rehearse, or we're asked, a lot of people have a hard time with it, or we're asked to rehearse our own deaths. And for rehearsals are a way of normalizing and of ritualizing and of making this time sacred, preparing our consciousness for the sacredness of death. And, and that's, I think, what psychedelics can help with, preparing our consciousness, opening our awareness so that we can feel into, live into, as we die, the reality that we are transitioning. This isn't the end of anything. That might be, we're as our native, as our indigenous friends say, we drop our bodies. That's what we do. But our spirit, there's something that doesn't die. And I think that entheogens can help us embrace that truth, and change. When we change the way we die, we change the way we live. And that's and the opportunity to use sacred medicines in service to this is true for all of our religious traditions.
Thank you. All right. Thank you all for still hanging with us. Norma, I got to turn back to you. And when we were talking about Buddhism and their traditions, we said it's not psychoactive substances that potentially alter the consciousness. It's you talked about drumming journals already. You talked about death meditation and meditation in general. But then we also talked about Christian mysticism, which we never got to today. So, just from a broad standpoint, what's your perception of either consciousness altering practices or psychoactive substances in terms of helping people on this death and dying journey?
Well, just to say, I'm one of those humans that is blessed with having had a near-death experience myself. And so I've gotten to go there and go through what Buddhists call the 8 stages of dying. So there are very specific trainings within Buddhism in great detail about what the mind and body go through as you are going through the dying process. And for whatever all the reasons, Spirit wanted me to experience that, but I have been through those stages. So it's, as the rabbi is saying, it's a practice for dying if you have a near-death experience. But Buddhism and shamanism and the other religions, like everyone's saying, exist so that we do have an opportunity to practice dying before we die. And then we're not as afraid. So I would point to the book, The Immortality Key by Brian Murarescu, who talks about in our Western culture, all throughout Europe and the Middle East, the use of psychedelics was part of the training for men, women, and children in how to be fully alive by using psychedelics of various kinds to help people to experience this death before death. I was saying to Chris when we talked earlier that in Buddhism, it's interesting because I don't find any evidence of psychedelics per se, but it's interesting about tea ceremony. We in the West have no idea what tea is really about, but now the culture of tea is coming to us just in about the last 10 years, and I've gotten very immersed in it. Because the plant tea, the same plant is made into many different permutations of it, and they have amazing altering effects on the mind. And so in Chinese and Japanese culture, they've become very adept at the use of all different teas for altering the mind in certain ways. So just saying, you have no idea what the tea ceremony is really all about. I'm learning more and more and studying with a Taiwanese tea master right now. And there's so much to come into learning about using tea in various ways for certain purposes of altering. But why alter our brains to help us deal with death? Well, like it says in the Immortality Key, once you have come into this experience of letting go of what you cling to in your mind, thinking that this is what you have to be and know to be you, but you're led to let go of that with altering substances, you are no longer afraid of losing your mind. You're taught how to encounter your fears and let go of what your tiny mind and become one with all consciousness. And when we do that, right, then we are no longer afraid. So in the Immortality Key, it emphasizes that right from the very beginning, like Hunt, you were talking about the loss of Christianity. Well, right in the beginning, when Jesus and Mary Magdalene were practitioners of altered states, they were already starting to be persecuted and shut down for it. And there was great persecution within the first 300 years of Christianity, because what it was taking people into these altered states to be able to experience death before dying so that they wouldn't be afraid. And then the Roman Empire or whoever the authorities were could not control them, because once you have experienced your immortality, you are not afraid. So, you know, that's what all religions, I think, are trying to help people do, is gain that freedom from the fear of our limitations and our limited perceptions, so that we can be free while we're alive. And we have to do it in community too, like everyone here is talking about. It's not just an individual go off and have a psychedelic experience. Like, you know, in Buddhism, there's the three jewels. It's the Buddha, the Sangha, and the Dharma. So you have, you know, a being who has achieved this enlightenment. So Jesus, all the different ones in the different religions, but you need to have the awareness that there are beings who have achieved this, and you have to be in community and held in community, and then study the teachings of how to do this. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, I feel we've only just scratched the surface, and I'm gonna have to ask you guys to come back, and we'll have to have a part two, because this has been so lovely. How about if you've got a minute, a takeaway that each of you could share, and take us out. So, Rabbi Dan, start with you.
A takeaway. The takeaway is that we need to heal our death-phobic culture, and any tools, you know, entheogens, psychedelics are one tool. They're not the only tool, but anything we can access to heal this culture and allow us to live a more meaningful lives as a result is what we need to embrace and savor.
Great, thank you. Sugra, I see you have to go. Yes.
Yeah, I think Hunter also has to go. For me, I think one of the things that I would just like to add to everything that's already been said is that a journey, an experience with plant medicine also allows you to release the unimportant, and we carry so much of that around with us in our bodies, in our spirits, in so many different ways, and to be able to release that allows space for all of the other stuff that we've been talking about. So that's an important part of the process, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Hunt.
I think I put this in the chat, and now it's really resonating with me. Is that the fear of dying, and I put a lot of this on sort of how Christianity has lived in the West, and especially in the U.S. But this fear of dying that I think has created a culture of fear in general. I think so much of the damage we're doing to other people is out of our fear that we're going to ultimately that we're not going to be safe, and I think I think our fear of dying, I think, may be at the root of all of our problems, honestly. It's that's really what drives so much of our politics and our religion and our demonizing of other people is our fear that we're not safe. And we are. If a psychedelic experience, one of the things that you can have with that is you realize actually we are safe, even though bad things can happen. Ultimately, we're held by something bigger than ourselves. So, yeah.
Great. All right, Norma, you take us out.
Slow down. Be aware in the moment, and stop running so that you can come into touch with the true nature of who you are. We are all mystical beings. We have access to altered states naturally within us. We can use psychedelics to amp up that access to the altered state, but right within you, there are all of these natural mechanisms for you to come in contact with your oneness, your interbeingness. And when you do, there's nothing to be afraid of. And you know that you know that. Oh, it is.
All right. Thank you all. And
Thank you.
yes, we will do this again.
Great.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day wherever you are.